You woke under the open sky, where the cold glow of ancient stars barely softened the biting chill of the desert night. Around you, the sand pressed softly beneath your bare feet, rough and shifting like the weight of a forgotten time. The air carried a scent, earth cracked by endless dryness, mingled with a metallic tang that scraped the edges of your throat. Your calloused fingers found a cracked clay jar, trembling slightly as you prepared for the sun's merciless heat. Knowing the water it might hold was your lifeline, you wrapped your thick cloak tighter, the coarse fabric scratching your weary skin, while the vast silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the repetitive sound of your movements. The coarse stones warmed beneath your palms, and you adjusted your mantle again and again, the slow, deliberate rhythm anchoring you to this stark existence. Above, the ancient constellations, once guides for pharaohs, blinked dimly. Each extinguished star whispered of threats hidden beneath the relentless sun. Your breath emerged in short puffs, steady despite the tension threading through the still air. Dawn broke with a pale, frosted blue, like a fragile promise lingering over the desert's edge. The village lay quiet, framed in tendrils of rising heat and faint dust, as if holding its breath before the day began. Beneath your feet, the sand shifted softly, its subtle sound a fragile echo in this timeless expanse. The worn texture of your cloak pressed against your arms, threadbare and familiar, carrying the faint scent of smoke and distant fires from the night before. You noticed the fine tremor in your hands, almost imperceptible, as you counted the dry grains of cereal reserved for this harsh morning, an unchanging ritual repeated until it felt carved into your very bones. Each grain a small testament to survival. If today, losing a phone's battery sparks impatience, you imagined the despair seeping in when your last drop of water vanished into the thirsty sand. The slow, careful measurement, the deliberate motions, tethered you to this relentless world. For a fleeting moment, the warmth flickered as you gathered around a communal fire with others. The crackle, soft and reassuring, like a heartbeat. The heat radiated gently against the chill still clinging to your skin. A brief break in the solitude and suspicion pressed into the dusty air. But then, the dogs abruptly ceased their barking. The sudden hush, heavy and unnatural in the sprawling stillness. Shared glances passed silently among the neighbors, their eyes dark pools of quiet worry. Something stirred beyond the dunes, a shift almost imperceptible but certain. The stars overhead seemed to dim ever so slightly, as if warning of a slow-moving shadow crossing the ancient sands. You felt the rhythm of the desert halt just a breath before uncertainty took hold again. Before Morpheus lulls you completely, take a moment to check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button has quietly disappeared, and I want to make sure you don't miss the next stories to drift off to sleep. Feel free to leave a soft like, gentle as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your presence keeps this little sanctuary alive. Thank you for being part of this calm corner. You rose slowly from the sand, your knees sinking slightly into the loosened grains that caught and slipped like hesitant whispers of a forgotten time. The weight of your cloak tugged at your shoulders, cold and damp with the faint remnants of night's chill, fraying edges pressing into your skin with a dull, persistent scratch. The horizon tilted into muted shades of pale gold and dusty rose, as the first fingers of dawn eased across the desert's vast canvas, softening edges, blurring harsh lines. Your breath came steady, each exhale a gentle mist fading into the pale morning air. The cracked clay jar cooled beneath your fingertips, its rough surface grainy like the earth itself, while the faintest vibration shivered through your hand, an echo of the night's restless tension gripping your chest. You tipped the jar cautiously, a thin thread of water shimmering within, trembling just at the verge of escape. You felt the dryness thicken behind your lips, the desert's appetite a constant companion, pressing against your throat. With deliberate slowness, you rose, your feet stirring the sand in tiny whirlwinds that settled as quickly as they formed. The vast open stretched before you, emptiness folded beneath a sky slowly unfurling its blushing light. Tucked between folds of your cloak, your hand tightened into a fist, holding on to the fragile life within the jar. The scent of scorched earth seeped from the ground beneath, mingling with the faint, lingering smoke, drifting lazily from distant traces of overnight fires, a reminder of lives clinging quietly to this harsh place. You stepped toward the village's edge, the structure's fragile shadows blurred at dawn's softness, each footprint pressed deeply into the sand, a slow, measured rhythm, marking time and presence, echoing your cautious heartbeat. The rough texture of sun-baked mud walls brushed briefly against your fingertips as you passed, the heat of the bricks slowly building, promising the long day. Ahead, a thin wind stirred the air, carrying whispers from the shifting dunes as if the desert itself exhaled in quiet warning. Around you, the village breathed in hushed anticipation. You caught a faint murmur, words swallowed by the morning haze. Then silence as neighbors paused in shared unease. The dogs, once restless and barking through the night, now lay still, their ears twitching at unseen movements beyond the sand's horizon. Your senses sharpened, every slight sound magnified against the stillness, the faint crackle of dry twigs underfoot, the soft rustle of your cloak turned sentinel. The sun climbed slowly, its light a bleached gold that spread slender fingers across the dunes, reaching for the village like a silent suitor, hesitant to disturb its fragile peace. Sweat began to bead subtly along your brow, tracing cold paths down your temples, contrasting with the dry heat absorbing beneath your feet. You adjusted your cloak again, the fabric coarse and familiar, its weight both a shield and a burden against the advancing day. In the distance, a soft crack carried, a brittle sound, thin as the breaking of old bones beneath earth. And your gaze locked onto a solitary figure emerging at the crest of the nearest dune. Movement hesitant, deliberate, as if the figure feared the very sand beneath its feet. Shadows lengthened, stretching like fingers trying to grasp at the fleeting daylight. The quiet threat reflected in the slow, deliberate steps from the dunes. You stopped, the jar pressed tightly against your side, your heart now a slow drumbeat, syncing with the subtle shifts of air and sand. The desert's breath mingled with your own, the pulse of ancient stones beneath your palms summoned in memory, grounding you against the rising tension. A whispered breeze traced patterns along your exposed skin, cool and faint, as if carrying secrets from distant sands, long buried beneath burning light. The figure came closer still, and the outline sharpened, a silhouette blending with the morning haze, features obscured by a hooded mantle as worn and threadbare as your own. You couldn't tell if it was friend or foe, only that the moment stretched thin like fragile glass, poised to shatter with the faintest sound. You moved one careful step back, sand shifting softly underfoot, the slow scrape a presence of its own. Your eyes flicked to the cracked jar again, the last reservoir of life pressing insistently against your side, fragile as hope beneath relentless skies. The distant murmur from the village ebbed into silence, breath held in suspended balance by the meeting of two solitary figures on a vast, unyielding plain. The cool metal of a hidden blade pressed briefly against your palm beneath the folds of your cloak, a reminder of silent vigilance and the quiet predator waiting behind measured breaths. The air thickened, the sun's warmth now crawling like slow fire across your arms and neck, bringing a flush of heat that stirred a bead of sweat to trace its path down your spine. Your courage felt as fragile as the shifting sand beneath your feet, and yet, with the rising light, a faint pulse of certainty stirred within. The desert, despite its threats, revealed fragments of unspoken answers. You drew a slow breath, steadying the tremble in your hands as the figure halted mere steps away, the shade of a smile, or was it a smirk, almost catching the morning light before fading into shadow. The moment stretched long and taut, an unspoken question hanging, as heavy as the arid air. Then, without warning, a faint, distant rumble rolled over the dunes, deep as the growl of ancient earth unsettled, stirring dust and silence alike. Your gaze snapped toward the horizon, where a dark cloud, unnatural in its sudden rise, clawed upward, blotting out the hesitant sun. The figure's eyes met yours briefly, sharp and unreadable, before disappearing, swallowed by the shifting sands and the rising shadow. You stood there, breath caught between past and future, the cracked jar a fragile talisman against the uncertainty swelling across the desert's vast embrace, knowing the day ahead held secrets as dry and fragmented as the earth beneath your feet. You stood there a moment longer, the grainy sand shifting beneath your boots as the figure vanished into the shimmering heat haze. The sun, now a pale orb, reluctant to climb higher, struggled through the rising dust, casting the village in a subdued light. Your pulse throbbed in your ears, slow but insistent, weaving a thread of quiet urgency through the still morning air. The cracked jar pressed cold and steady against your side, an anchor amidst uncertainty. Careful not to disturb the brittle silence, you turned back toward the village's edge, your steps deliberate, each one stirring faint clouds that bloomed and faded like fragile whispers. The air tasted dry and sharp, carrying the faintest trace of smoke from last night's embers, warmth lingering like a memory folded in the folds of your cloak. Around you, the sun-baked walls seemed to lean closer, their rough textures roughened further by the slow caress of desert wind. The familiar scent of dry earth and faded herbs tugged at your senses, grounding you even as your thoughts struggled to settle. Every breath you drew was measured, each inhale filling your lungs with the arid heaviness of a landscape old and unyielding. You noticed the stiff scrape of your cloak against your arms, coarse fabric irritating yet oddly comforting, the sensation a thread tying you to this stark place. You paused, fingers brushing the cooling clay of the jar once more, feeling the water inside shifting gently, a fragile promise, a fading lifeline. The village exhaled around you. Soft murmurs, exchanged in clipped phrases, carried on uneven breaths. You caught the low murmur of voices behind rough wooden doors, careful and hushed, as if sound might fracture the fragile peace. The dogs that had been silent moments before now lay motionless, ears flicking at uncertain signals carried across the sand. The tension hung like a fine mist, settling over the cracked streets and crumbling walls, thickening the heat that began to press against your neck and shoulders. Guided by the slow, sticky rhythm of survival, you moved toward the well at the village center, a rounded stone structure battered by time and sun. Your fingers grazed the rough edges of its opening, biting into dry, cracked stone like the husk of some ancient memory. The rope, thick and worn, creaked under your careful pull as you lowered the bucket slowly, savoring the sound, the weight, the waiting. The vibration traveled up your arm in a languid pulse. Every moment stretched out, hung heavy with unspoken fears. As you hauled the bucket upward, grains of sand slipped past your boots, settling silently beneath your feet, as if the earth itself drank the day's silence. The pale water shimmered uneasily in the faint light, the surface rippling like something alive, fragile. Has the desert's fragile calm. You cup the water slowly, bringing coolness to parched lips, the sensation sharp and fleeting beneath the day's early heat. Each drop felt precious, a small defiance against the wasteland pressing in from all sides. Swallowing slowly, you savored the coolness, the way it spread warmth through your chest, a quiet rebellion against the ever-present dryness. As the water trickled down, the sweat pooling beneath your brow seemed to mingle with the dust, streaming slow and sure, marking time with patient persistence. With the well behind you, you moved toward the sparse market square. Empty stalls stood silent, their ragged fabrics fluttering weakly in a rising breeze that stirred the dust into lazy spirals. The sun now climbed steadily, shedding muted light across cracked pottery and withered baskets, their contents long gone, vanished like the fleeting shade of a desert. Cloud. The scent here was sharper. The smokiness of burnt wood mingled with the faint sting of dry leaves, swirling together like a whispered warning. Voices stirred again, stronger this time, a cautious chorus, blurred by distance and heat. You paused near a cluster of low walls, pressing your back against the cool mud brick. The roughness beneath your palms grounded you, while your ears caught fragments of conversation, words thick with worry but quietly steady, hints of preparation, of watchfulness woven through shared breaths. Your gaze drifted skyward. The sun rode higher, its light bleaching the horizon into a haze that shimmered with hidden movement. The ancient constellations, faint and weary, blinked back at you from the sapphire above, their presence a silent testament to cycles that stretched beyond human reckoning. A wind whispered then, not harsh or sudden, but insistent, a low susurration weaving through scattered rooftops, stirring loose sand and forgotten stones. You felt a prickle along your skin, a shiver despite the sun's slow heat. The village seemed to hold its breath again. Every pause tightened like a held note. Somewhere far beyond, the desert shifted beneath the feet of something unseen, its presence and echo felt rather than seen, curling the hairs at your neck, threading tension through the widening silence. The cracked jar hung heavy at your side as you stepped away from the walls, the rhythm of the village now a slow pulse beneath the vastness. Each footfall felt amplified, the desert swallowing sound, leaving only the faint scrape of sand and the slow shudder of your movements. Your eyes caught sight of a glint near the horizon, a flicker of metal or stone, subtle and fleeting, before it melted into the heat's wavering embrace. The shadows stretched long now, and the sun trembled on the verge of midday. Fragile light, sifting through the haze like threads of gold, fraying against an uncertain sky. Ahead, a whisper of movement unsettled the distant dunes once more. You stopped, breath slow but steady, the world around you narrowing to the cracked jar in your grip and the shifting silhouette inching toward you from the sands. A shape blurred by distance, but undeniable in its intent. The sun dipped suddenly behind a thin cloud, cooling the blaze and casting the desert into muted gray. In that suspended moment, the desert held its secrets close, and you understood, with a tightening in your chest, that the true journey was just beginning. You traced the grainy sand with your gaze, the slow heat rising from its surface, blurring every edge into a molten shimmer. The figure that had disappeared behind the dunes was now little more than a memory traced in your mind, the uncertainty weighing heavier than the cracked jar pressed against your ribs. Each breath you drew tasted of dry earth and distant smoke, the arid landscape folding around you like a cocoon of brittle quiet. Your boots stirred faint clouds as you moved, lighter steps marking reluctant rhythms on the hot sand. The village lay ahead, its mud brick walls bathed in the pale light that trembled just beneath the burning sun. The steady flicker of heat made the edges of the buildings waver, wavering like ghosts holding their breath beneath the relentless sky. Your fingers brushed the worn texture of scarred by years of patient use. You approached with deliberate care, the rough edges pressing cold against your palm as you lowered the creaking bucket into its dark throat. The rope rattled softly, a metallic whisper threading through the stillness as it slipped beyond sight. You felt the slow drag, the tension growing, each second stretched into an eternity. When the bucket broke the surface, the water shimmered, broken by a ripple as faint as a heartbeat. You grasped it carefully, the cool air kissing your skin as you lifted the fragile liquid from the earth's hidden depths. You brought it to your lips, slow and methodical, savoring each drop like a stolen secret. The water's chill blossomed inside you, a fleeting warmth in the passing cold of desperation. Around you, the village breathed a shaky murmur. Doors cracked ajar, exhaled whispers, voices hushed. Tremulous, woven with threads of ancient worries. Somewhere close, a dog stirred beneath the shade of a withered tree, its breath slow and steady, a fragile rhythm in the quiet disorder of survival. The muted clatter of shifting sand mixed with the faint whistle of the wind, weaving through empty baskets and sun-bleached pottery. You stepped away from the well, the jar nestled beneath your arm, heavy and insistent. The scent of smoke lingered, sharp and faint, curling with the dust and dry heat. Shadows shifted lazily as the sun climbed slowly, its light spreading like thin fingers over the cracked earth and the trembling walls. You paused, letting the warmth wash over your skin, waiting as the village seemed to hold its breath again. A soft crack sounded from the distant dunes, a brittle snap that caught your attention and slowed your pulse. Your eyes flicked to the horizon, where ripples of heat danced in slow waves, distorting shapes and promises alike. The memory of the hooded figure lingered, a silhouette carved from dust and suspicion. You felt the dry tension tightening, a low coil winding in your chest, a drumbeat echoing beneath the sun. You moved cautiously toward the market square, where empty stalls stood like fallen sentinels under tattered cloths flickering in a rising breeze. Dust spiraled at your feet and was carried upward, twisting into lazy columns that dissolved against the empty sky. The air smelled of burnt wood and withered leaves, sharp as a warning left unspoken. Every step echoed hollowly, the sand swallowing sound, but leaving behind the trace of your hesitance. By the worn walls, the murmur of voices rose, muted yet steady. You pressed your back against the hard mud brick, the roughness grounding you like a heartbeat beneath frantic thoughts. Conversations dipped and swelled quietly, words clipped and measured, colored with cautious plans and watchful eyes. You listened through the veil of heat and worry, feeling the fragile pulse of a community hanging in delicate balance. The sun rose higher, bleaching the horizon to a shimmering white that flushed your skin beneath your coarse cloak. Beads of sweat traced rivulets down your temples, matching the dry dust that clung to your throat and lips. You adjusted your mantle again, the fabric rough and persistent, a shield from the sun and a weight to carry. Your gaze caught a flicker, a gleam near the dunes, quick and uncertain, like a fragment of something lost to the desert's eyes. The movement vanished into the haze, swallowed by the slow tidal waves of heat and sand. The moment stretched, fragile as a breath caught between exhale and silence. A low wind rose, threading through the narrow alleys and stirring loose stones, carrying with it a whisper that hinted of unsettled things. Your skin prickled in response, the air thickening with an ancient unease no sun-warmed dust could dispel. The village seemed to shrink inward, holding its secrets close beneath the crucible sky. You took a step forward, feet pressing deep into the softened earth, the cracked jar a steady weight in your grasp. The village's pulse slowed, the fading echoes of voices melding into the desert's vast, watchful quiet. Your breath came soft and steady, syncing with the slow shift of light and shadow. In the distance, beyond the horizon's shimmer, a sudden movement caught your eye, a dark shape sliding along the dune's ridge, deliberate and concealed. It paused, lingering with the cruelty of a secret kept too long. Your heart tightened, the fragile thread of certainty unraveling beneath the silent gaze of the desert. And then, just as the sun struck its zenith, a sharp flicker, a flash of metal caught briefly between sand and sky, before the shadow melted once more into the heat's wavering embrace, leaving you alone with the weight of the cracked jar and the still, beatless tension that stretched across the world beneath your feet. You moved away from the flicker on the horizon, every step a labor in the heat-thick air that clung to your skin like a heavy, invisible shroud. The village's breath shifted in quiet waves around you. Soft sighs beneath shuttered windows, the faint scrape of slowly stirring dust. The cracked jar nestled beneath your arm felt heavier now, as if the desert itself pressed upon it, the weight of an unspoken threat sealed tightly within. Your boots whispered over sun-baked earth, footprints fading beneath the warm gusts that carried the scent of smoke and dried leaves. Around you, the market square held its fragile emptiness, tense, sagging under the steady climb of the sun's glow. You trace the jagged shadows pooling beneath cracked pottery, the cracked surfaces telling tales of long-forgotten hands, of sudden storms and restless winds. The air simmered, thick and unmoving, save for the occasional flick of sand that brushed faintly against your cloak. Ahead, a low murmur crept along the narrow lanes, a hesitant chorus of voices weaving through the alleys, soft enough to be mistaken for the wind's own susurrations. You slid against a cool mud wall, the rough texture pressing sharp and real against your palm, steadying the rhythmic hammering in your chest. The words you caught were clipped, cautious, layered with the weight of shared fears and unspoken questions. You did not reply. You did not move too swiftly, too plainly. The village held its breath alongside you. Smoke trailed from a distant hearth, curling lazily into the pale sky. A ribbon of warmth folding slowly into the cool blue. You breathed in the scent, deep and slow, the faintest comfort woven through the harshness. The sun spilled gold, washing over the cracked walls like slow liquid warmth. Your fingers brushed the rough cloth of your mantle again, tightening around the jar as a tentative anchor in the growing heat. A sudden shift pricked your senses. The subtle change of wind grazing your skin, the distant crackle of dry wood snapping as if a brittle bone had broken quietly under earth. Your gaze lifted, tracking the slow rise of dust curling beyond the village's limits, a pale spiral that held the day's restless secret. Your heart slowed, steady but alert, each beat a measured step along a narrowing path. You took a cautious step forward, sand giving slight beneath your weight, the grains loosed by your motion and caught by rising currents. Every whisper of movement, every faint sound held weight. Within this silence, the slow, dry breathing of the desert seeped in, a background symphony of crackling heat and shifting stones under endless sun. The village's pulse slowed to match your own, each breath a thread binding you to this fragile moment. For a brief moment, your eyes caught a fragment of silver, faint and sharp, a glimmer that dwelled briefly on the curve of a sun-bleached shard, a slit of metal tucked where it shouldn't be. The sight caused your fingers to clench the jar with sudden firmness. your skin prickling with awareness. The world stood poised on the edge of an uncharted breath. You moved with deliberate slowness toward the periphery of the village, where slow-moving shadows pooled amid shattered clay and shattered hopes alike. The ancient stones beneath your feet held faint warmth, weightless keepers of memories, folded and forgotten. A hush descended, and the faintest breeze carried the bitter tang of scorched earth and dry smoke through the alleys. At the village's border, the dunes stretched endlessly, rolling waves of sand blurring like a shimmering sea. There, a sudden ripple disturbed the stillness, a form, low and cautious, tracing delicate impressions against the tawny cliffs. Your breath caught, slow and taut, the pulse in your veins mirroring the silent rise and fall of the desert's languid rhythm. Your eyes remained fixed on that subtle disturbance as it paused, the faint outline of a crouched figure blending into earth and shadow, an echo of your own solitude. You felt the cold press of metal beneath your cloak once more, a whispered reminder of vigilance resting lightly against your palm. The sun dipped briefly behind a lazy cloud, cooling your skin just enough to draw a slow bead of sweat from your brow. The village behind you held its fragile stillness, every whispered conversation and shifting glance momentarily stilled by the growing tension. Above, ancient stars blinked faint and restless beneath an ocean of light, their distant fires a silent testament to the cycles turning far beyond human sight. Your breath deepened, not in panic, but with a calm sharpened by months beneath this relentless sky. The figure shifted, the faint sound of sand releasing its hold on earth, a soft, dry sigh. It began to rise, slow, deliberate, a movement as measured and weighty as the hour itself. For a heartbeat, your eyes met those hidden in the curve of the hood. A flicker of something unreadable passed in that gaze, a shadow's secret carried on a breathless wind. The moment stretched and thinned, a fragile glass on the verge of breaking under its own weight. Then, just as the sun's warmth crept onward, a tremor rolled faintly beneath your feet, a subtle shaking like the desert exhaling a slow, ancient breath. Dust lifted around the dunes, coiling into a quiet storm born of secrets and hidden dangers. The figure vanished, slipping beneath the rising veil of sand and heat, swallowed whole by the shifting sands you both called home. You remained, hands gripping the cracked jar, tight against your side, every sense sharpened to the desert's pulse. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers, reaching for truths long buried beneath a merciless sky. And there, in the widening silence between moments, you understood the day was no longer yours to command. Something moved beyond the visible, an unseen tide swelling beneath the calm surface of scorching stone and whispering wind. Your breath caught, slow and steady, as the cracked jar's fragile weight pressed firmly into your side. The desert held its breath with you, and far beyond the dunes, the faintest shimmer rose again, a flash of something impossible, moving with deliberate intent, poised to reshape the silent sands forever. You stood for a moment longer, the sun's pale light trembling just beneath the swelling heat, pressing gently on your skin. The cracked jar at your side felt impossibly fragile, its cold weight an anchor in the vast, shifting desert. You traced the rough texture of the sand beneath your boots, each grain a memory, slipping quietly out of reach, settling like whispers into the earth's slow breath. The village around you remained hushed, as if unwilling to shatter the fragile quiet that hung between sun and shadow. Your fingers brushed against the woven fabric of your cloak, the coarse strands catching faintly on your skin, a slow reminder of the many suns that had scorched you beneath its weight. The faint scent of smoke swirled softly around you, threading through the dust and the dry air like a fragile promise folded into the day's relentless pressure. Nearby, the wall of sun-baked mud pressed cool and rough against your fingertips as you moved deliberately, the slow rhythm of your steps stirring soft clouds of sand in your wake, a quiet lingering echo of your presence in a world that swallowed sound without mercy. Ahead, the market square lay empty, tents sagging wearily, their faded fabrics fluttering like ghostly signals in a gentle breeze. Dust rose in slow spirals, tracing delicate patterns that dissolved into the brightness above. The sun climbed steadily, its light stretching long shadows over cracked pottery and weathered baskets, now empty, their muted shapes living only as faint reminders of what once was. The air carried a bitter tang, warmed earth mingled with the sharp sting of burnt wood and drying leaves, a scent heavy with old stories and quiet warnings. You moved toward the village's center, your steps measured and slow, every crunch of sand beneath your boots, a soft punctuation in the sprawling stillness. Your palm grazed the stone of the well, rough and hot, time-worn beneath your touch. The rope creaked softly as you lowered the bucket, every motion deliberate and drawn out, the sound threading through the air like a whispered incantation. Water touched the pail's brim with a faint splash, fragile and trembling, before you hauled it slowly upward, the weight pressing lightly against the pull of gravity and the relentless heat. The cool shimmer of water pooled in the bucket, its surface fractured by tiny ripples that caught the emerging light, blue and pale as the fading stars you'd left behind hours before. You cupped the liquid in your palms, the sensation cold and fleeting against your sun-scarred skin, a small defiance against the parched emptiness that surrounded you. Slowly you brought the water to your lips, savoring each drop with a tenderness born of necessity. The coolness eased, tightening behind your throat, blossoming briefly into warmth that reached deep into your chest, a quiet reprieve from the desert's endless thirst. Around you, the village breathed in low murmurs, a subtle choreography of voices exchanged in muted, cautious phrases. Doors cracked ajar, whispered secrets, as shaded figures lingered in the softened light. The fragile community pressing together beneath the silent gaze of the sun. Even the dull breathing of nearby dogs in tentative stillness, their ears twitching at sounds you could not hear, but felt pressing into the edges of your awareness. The soft scratching of the wind teased loose stones and stirred forgotten dust, weaving through narrow alleyways with a tone near to a sigh. You turned your gaze upward, the sky now stretched wide and blanched, an ocean of pale frost melting beneath the relentless climb of sunlight. The ancient constellations flickered, faint embers from a distant fire long since burned low, their presence a mute witness to the cycles turning far beyond human reach. Your eyes drifted again toward the horizon, where the dunes rolled softly like slow waves, yet something there stirred differently. A movement, subtle and deliberate, breaking the day's still surface. A silhouette traced the sun-drenched ridge, low and cautious, as if seeking refuge within the shifting sand. Your breath slowed, tightening the grip on the cracked jar, as the tension in the air wove itself through the perspiration beading on your brow. The figure's outline sharpened, an indistinct shape cloaked in dust and shadow, moving with careful intent. You felt the faint clink of metal beneath your cloak, a weight pressed steady in quiet vigilance, pulsing slowly with your racing heart. The sand beneath your feet seemed to hold its breath, the warm grains muting sound, amplifying every subtle motion. Your gaze locked briefly with the hooded form's hidden eyes, their depths reflecting more questions than answers. A sudden shift in the wind brought a whisper of smoke and dry earth back to you. A fleeting moment of coolness that stirred the fine hairs along your neck. The sun faltered behind a thin veil of cloud, the desert momentarily cooling as tension stretched taut between two solitary figures bound by the merciless landscape. For one breath, the world seemed poised between calm and chaos. Then, a low rumble rolled softly beneath your feet, a tremor in the sand as the earth exhaled its ancient warning. Dust stirred violently along the ridge, coiling high into the sky. A slow surge of motion creeping beneath the surface you could no longer ignore. The figure wavered, then retreated, swallowed swiftly by the rising veil of heat and sand, leaving you alone in the stark vastness. Your heart hammered, steady but fierce, every nerve alive beneath the scorching sky. The cracked jar pressed insistently against your side, heavier now with unspoken weight. The village, the desert, the sun-baked stones, it all seemed to hold its breath alongside you, waiting. You turned away from the dunes, stepping slowly back toward whatever sanctuary the village had to offer. Yet knowing deep inside that the real journey was only beginning. A flicker caught your eye then, a glint, sharp and sudden, breaking across the desert's wave-like shimmer. It lingered for a heartbeat before vanishing, a mere spark lost to the vast fracture of the sands. The light died out, leaving you staring into the sun-bleached horizon, the cracked jar held close, and a silence so complete. It felt like the desert itself was watching, waiting, and ready to unfold its next secret. You felt the slow heat pressing back as you moved away from the shimmering veil that had swallowed the figure, its retreat, a quiet surrender into the wavering air. The faintest currents stirred the dust at your feet, tracing lazy patterns like whispered messages across the cracked earth. Your palms still clutched the cold jar, its fragile weight a steady pulse against your ribs, threading comfort through the gathering tension. The village lay muted beneath the expanding sun, the muted gold washing over walls and rooftops like a slow breath exhaled into stillness. Your footsteps shifted the warm sand in small clouds, each grain catching light before settling again, silent witnesses to your deliberate advance. The coarse fibers of your cloak rubbed against your skin, a constant reminder of the world's persistence. And your own. The air hung thick with scent. Dry earth mingled with the faint smoke still drifting from low embers, hidden in shaded corners. Somewhere distant, a dog breathed heavily, its quiet respiration blending with the soft rustling of faded leaves, stirred by a hesitant breeze. The village seemed to hold itself poised, like a single breath caught between moments. As you reached the well, your fingers curved around the rough stone, textured like the bark of an ancient tree. The rope moaned low and slow as you drew the bucket upward, the water's surface trembling, silver threaded under the sun's awakening glow. A brief ripple scattered light across your hands, cool, tangible, the liquid, a rare gift you cradled carefully against your cracked lips. The fragile satisfaction of moisture, threading warmth deep within you, was a quiet rebellion against the days. Dry demands. The murmurs circling softly through alleys rose and fell like quiet waves. Voices, cautious and sparse, flickered behind shuttered windows and beneath sagging awnings. A low tapestry woven with shared fears. You pressed your back against a sun-warmed wall, the gritty mud brick gritty beneath your fingertips, grounding you in the shifting moment. Dust swirled slowly, set adrift by unseen movements, echoing the restless pulse you now carried. Your gaze drifted upward, past rooftops and trembling vines, to the ancient constellations barely visible in higher still, its rays stretching out like slow fingers that hesitated before touching the village's fraying edges. Shadows lengthened, dark trails cast between faded pottery and cracked wood. You stepped quietly toward the empty stalls of the market square, the silence heavy between broken bricks and splintered shelves. The dust rose in lazy spirals, fragile columns suspended against the relentless light, carrying with them the scent of old fires and fading leaves, a ghostly chorus threading the dried heat. A faint crack echoed from the dunes. Your breath caught, slowed beneath the tightening coil in your chest. Your eyes snapped to the horizon, scanning the rolling waves of sand, heated into shimmering mirages. There, distant and almost lost to the glare, a subtle movement traced the ridge, a low, deliberate shape inching forward, cloaked in muted earth tones that bled into the desert itself. Your fingers clenched the jar tighter, the cold surface gnawing comfort into your skin as you shifted your weight. The soft clink of metal nestled beneath your cloak was a thin thread of reassurance, silent and hidden, yet alive beneath the heat's slow weight. The figure halted briefly, a shadow carved from dust and heat, then bent lower, blending further into the cresting dunes, as if swallowed by the shifting sands. The sun dipped behind a thin veil of cloud, trading warmth for a fleeting coolness that raised goosebumps along your arms. The village seemed to breathe in unison with you. The low hum of hushed voices, the gentle stirring of sand, and then held still, poised at the edge of something vast and unknown. A sudden tremor traveled underfoot, light and hesitant, like the pulse of an ancient beast exhaling deep below the surface. Dust lifted sharply from the dunes, twisting into quiet storms that spiraled high into the pale sky. The figure vanished, swallowed by the growing veil of sun and sand, leaving behind only empty air and a silence thick with expectancy. You stood rooted, every sense sharpened, heart beating slow, deliberate, as your breath mingled with the desert's endless expanse. The cracked jar a cool anchor against your side, its fragile life contained within a world poised between stillness and storm. Turning away from the dunes, you moved toward the drying heat of the village, the sand dimpling beneath your careful steps. The sun climbed relentlessly, each ray a thread stitching slow warmth across your skin, a weight pressing steady into the day. You felt the coarse fabric of your cloak gather around you like a shield, as rough and certain as the earth beneath your feet. Around you, the village breathed softly, whispers curling from shaded doorways, faint flickers of movement beneath peeled awnings. The scent of smoke twisted into the dry air, a small comfort bound to unseen stories folded deep beneath cracked plaster and sunburned stone. Your gaze flicked once more toward the horizon, where shimmer and shadow merged. A sudden flash caught the light again, metallic and sudden, before fading swiftly into the heat's wavering embrace. The flicker was a spark that cracked the quiet like a brittle fracture, sharp and fleeting. You felt the weight of it settle in your bones, a tightening coil wrapped tight around the steady beat of your heart. The slow rhythm of survival pulled you onward, across the town, beyond the shifting dunes, toward a place where secrets waited beneath the relentless sun, ready to be uncovered. The desert held its breath, and you sensed, deep beneath the burning sky, that the silence was only waiting to break. You shifted your weight, the cracked jar a steady presence against your ribs, its cool solidity a fragile defiance in the day's overwhelming heat. The village seemed to hold its breath, every muted sound unfolding with deliberate slowness. The faint rustle of fabric, whispered conversations behind shuttered windows, the distant creak of a door on its hinges. In this suspended moment, the desert's vast emptiness felt alive, a silent audience watching your every cautious move. Your feet stirred the sun-baked sand in hesitant rhythms, each grain slipping softly beneath your worn boots, a quiet echo pressed into the dust. The rough fibers of your cloak scraped gently against your skin as you adjusted its weight, the coarse material grounding you to the stark reality around you. The scent of smoke lingered still, an intangible thread weaving through the arid air, pulling memories of warmth from the chill that clung to your bones. Ahead, the well awaited like a patient sentinel. You approached with deliberate steps, hands brushing across the scalded stone, rough and cracked like the earth itself. The rope groaned low as you eased the bucket into the shadowed depths, the slow slide of it pulling taut with patient stubbornness. Above the silent well, the sun climbed languidly, casting frail beams that fractured the heat into patterns against weathered walls. You felt the jar's subtle weight shift as water gathered, breaking the silence with a faint ripple. Your fingers curled around the bucket's rim, lifting the cool liquid slowly, savoring its reluctant shimmer. The first droplets met your lips, sharp and fleeting, a brief moment of relief stretching across the relentless aridity. The coolness traced a delicate path down your throat, promising reprieve even as the dry heat settled like a second skin. Movement flickered in your periphery. You turned your gaze toward the market square, where faded tents drooped like weary giants beneath the unforgiving sun. Dust danced in lazy spirals, rising from cracked pottery and bleached baskets, fragile remnants of a world worn thin by time and circumstance. A faint breeze whispered through the narrow alleys, carrying the scent of burnt wood and dry leaves, an unmistakable hint of yesterday's fires lingering stubbornly in the air. You edged closer to the crumbling walls, your back pressed against the sun-warmed clay. The texture bit softly into your skin, its roughness a sharp contrast to the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing. Voices whispered through the dusty streets, muted, clipped, words tangled in cautious hope and quiet dread. You listen through the veil of heat and silence, the shared tension wrapping tautly like the folds of your tattered cloak. Your eyes drifted upward, toward the sky now bleached pale blue, the ancient constellations dim and distant beneath a sea of relentless light. A faint prickle crept along your spine as a breeze swept low, brushing loose threads of your mantle against exposed skin. The desert exhaled softly, its breath mingling with yours, carrying a silent warning folded into the hot air. A flicker caught your eye, a subtle shimmer on the horizon where dunes rolled like frozen waves. The shape was low and cautious, cloaked in dust and shadow, its movement deliberate and unhurried. You tightened your grip on the jar, feeling the hidden weight of the cold metal beneath your cloak. A silent promise of vigilance pressed against your palm. The sand beneath. Your feet held still, absorbing every careful step as the figure traced tentative patterns across the sun-bleached ridge. The sun dipped briefly behind a wispy cloud, cooling the heat just enough to draw a bead of sweat down your temple. The silhouette paused, blending further into the shimmering haze, its presence heavy with unspoken purpose. You held your breath, the village fading into a quiet hum behind you, the distant murmur of cautious voices swallowed by the vastness. A low tremor shifted beneath your boots, subtle but sure, like the heartbeat of ancient stones stirring beneath the shifting sands. Dust swirled violently, a silent storm rising from the dunes, as if the desert itself was restless, an old secret unraveling beneath the glaring sky. The figure vanished, swallowed by the sudden veil of sand and light, leaving only empty air, thick with anticipation. You remained rooted, every sense pulsing with the slow rhythm of survival. The cracked jar, fragile and cold, pressed firmly against your side, a tether to the delicate balance of this sun-scorched world. Around you, the village held still, suspended between hope and fear, shadow and heat, as the day pressed onward with merciless patience. Your gaze flicked once more toward the distant horizon. There, the heat shimmer scattered like fractured glass, catching the light in shards of silver that danced and vanished with cruel teasing. A sudden flash, sharp, metallic, flared briefly before fading into the desert's relentless glare. The image lingered in your vision, a spark caught between the earth's silent breath and the blistering sky. Your heart tightened, the weight of unseen eyes pressing through the veil of light and sand. The slow, grinding rhythm of the day's heat threaded through your bones, a steady reminder that beneath this fragile calm, danger waited patiently, coiled and watchful. The village whispered around you, soft, hesitant sounds mingling with the dry taste of earth and smoke. Your fingers curled once more around the cracked jar, the cool surface in anchor against the tide of mounting uncertainty. Each step back toward the sheltering walls was measured, deliberate, a slow retreat into the thin sanctuary of faded stone and wary eyes. As the sun climbed higher, the shadows lengthened unevenly, teasing secrets the light could not reach. The horizon rippled again, subtle, unyielding, a silent beckoning from the shimmering dunes. Your breath slowed, steady, as the weight of it all settled deep into your chest. The day's journey was far from over, and somewhere, beyond the desert's wavering embrace, something ancient stirred, ready to rewrite the story that had only just begun. You stood quietly at the edge of the village, the cracked jar cool against your side, a fragile burden and a steadfast companion under the rising sun. The air had settled into a gentle warmth, the sharp edge of morning heat softened by the slow climb of daylight. Around you, the village breathed in muted whispers, soft footsteps over sand, the faint rustling of fabric, the distant murmur of voices threading cautious hope among the cracked walls. You could feel the rhythm of the day slowing into a stillness that felt both precious and fragile, like a whispered lullaby for the earth itself. The sand beneath your boots held its heat gently, no longer scorched, but warm as a familiar embrace. Your gaze drifted across the horizon, where the dunes rolled on, timeless waves frozen in silent vigilance. The figure from the dunes, the one who lingered in shadow and dust, was gone now, swallowed by the shifting sands and the currents of the dry wind. Yet something in the air remained charged, a quiet tension tempered by the softening light. The faint clink of metal beneath your cloak was a steady reminder of vigilance, but also, strangely, of endurance. You tightened your grip on the jar, the cool clay grounding your thoughts as the village around you stirred into quiet action. Slowly, the neighbors began to emerge from their shelters, faces marked by wear and worry, but also the faintest glimmer of relief. The dogs, once restless and alert, lay with steady breathing beneath the sparse shade. Your eyes wander across the familiar scene, the cracked pottery set carefully aside, the scattered remnants of last night's fire cooling beneath the open sky. A gentle smile tugged at your lips, not of joy, but of wary satisfaction. The day pressed on, but the storm had passed, at least for now. You could almost hear the earth exhale, a slow release of tension woven through the sand and stone. The sun, climbing higher, bathed the village in pale light that softened the jagged edges of survival. The air carried the faint scent of smoke and dried leaves, mingling with the dry earth in a harmony that felt ancient and whole. You adjusted your cloak once more, the coarse fabric, a constant, familiar weight, as steady as the sun's patient rise. Turning away from the well, you moved toward the quiet market square, where faded tents fluttered lazily in the gentle breeze. The empty stalls stood like sentinels, guarding the fragile peace settled across the village. Here, beneath the muted sky, the last traces of fear seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet determination woven into each exchanged glance. Your breath came steady now, no longer hurried by suspicion, but guided by a slow, deliberate calm. The cracked jar at your side held its secret life, the water delicate and shimmering, a small promise of continuity in a world shaped by endless change. In the distance, the dunes shimmered in the heat, their ridges softening into gentle curves under the watchful sky. The shadow that had haunted the horizon had vanished without trace, leaving behind only the whispered memory of uncertainty and the patient silence of the desert. You found yourself drawn to the horizon once more, watching as the ancient stars faded, swallowed by the day's growing light. Their faint embers seemed to pulse in time with your own heartbeat, a subtle reminder that cycles end only to begin again. You breathed in the dry air deeply, the warmth folding over you like a slow embrace. The village settled into a quiet rhythm, each moment stretched like a thread woven carefully into the fabric of survival and hope. Faces softened, voices lowered, and the sun's gentle gaze promised no sudden fury today. The cracked jar, a symbol now, not just of fragile life preserved against harsh odds, but of resilience quietly enduring beneath relentless skies. As the afternoon slipped forward, the shadows grew longer, pooling softly beneath the stones and sun-baked walls. The chill of night had not yet come, but the day's harshness was waning, easing into a familiar calm. You allowed yourself to slow even further, letting the rhythm of sand and sky wash over you like a gentle tide. Your steps became lighter, measured, carrying the weight of miles and memories alike. The village, once a place marked by closeness and suspicion, now felt like a sanctuary, woven from shared endurance, a fragile community standing together beneath an indifferent sun. Finally, you stopped at the crest of a low dune, the cracked jar resting easy in your hand. Below, the village spread in quiet repose, warmed by shadows and soft light. You closed your eyes for a moment, feeling the desert's breath brush your skin, a tender farewell wrapped in dust and heat. The day edged toward its close with the slow certainty of a weary lullaby. Somewhere, far beyond the shifting sands and silent stones, the desert held its secrets still. But for now, peace had settled like a soft blanket over this small corner of the world. You exhaled slowly, the tension uncoiling and drifting away on the warm wind. The cracked jar, your fragile lifeline, felt lighter now, as if the day's passage had gifted it new strength. The sun dipped low, casting tender hues across the sand and sky, a muted farewell painted in gold and rose. And with the fading light, a gentle quiet drew over everything, wrapping the village and you in the soft embrace of the desert night. At last, the world seemed to pause, and all that remained was the slow, steady breath of survival, the whispered promise of more days to come, and the peaceful weight of the cracked jar held close. The desert slept around you, endless and patient, as your eyes drifted shut, carried softly into the calm night.